on today's StoryBeat.
David Lloyd, who was probably my favorite sitcom writer of all time, who did Mary Tyler Moore, and well, he spoke at NYU, and like 6 people were there to go see him. So it's like this private audience with David Lloyd. And he said the difference between movies and television is television, you should be able to turn off the picture and just listen to them talk. But movies, you should be able to turn off the sound and watch it, because one is visual, one is not.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Kuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Kuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, TV and film writer Steven Kunes, has worked on numerous sitcoms and movies. At the age of 26, legendary TV producer Norman Lear hired Steven to write and develop half-hour comedies for his company, Embassy Television. This led to assignments in one-hour TV shows and eventually led Steven to motion pictures, where he became one of Hollywood's most successful script doctors. He's worked on TV shows like South Park, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Out of This World, Cheers, and on movies such as Catch Me If You Can, Legally Blonde, Castaway, The Pelican Brief, Groundhog Day, and more. In 2015, he created the hit comedy series Over My Dead Body, which streams on Amazon Prime. About Over My Dead Body, Norman Lear said, quote, "This is the best idea for a TV series that I can remember. It's absolutely hilarious," close quote. In 2021, Steven delivered a TEDx talk in Philadelphia entitled Square One at 60. So for all those reasons and many more, I'm truly delighted to welcome the exceptional writer Steven Kunes to StoryBeat today. Steven, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk about comedy. The old line is that dying is easy and comedy is hard. It's almost impossible to define, but what makes comedy so difficult to do well?
Well, I got my sense of humor from my mother, and also living on the East Coast, I think I've always laughed at tragedy. I don't mean like, somebody getting shot or something, but just somebody trying to put on a particular air or performance and then tripping up. What makes it hard to do well is making it seem like it's not manufactured. When I watch shows today, they're just hitting the beats. One of the things that we've been complaining about is, oh my God, AI could take us over. Well, of course they could, because all they're doing is imitating hitting the beats.
Sure, hitting the beats. It's become stale. I think that's what you're saying.
Right.
And I particularly like the ones that are really strange or offbeat themselves, like Curb Your Enthusiasm, which I enjoy. That doesn't hit the beats.
That doesn't hit the beats. Seinfeld didn't hit the beats. In fact, most of the shows they said would never work that were wonderful did not hit the beats.
Or shows like Veep didn't hit the beats.
Right. In fact, I still get this today. I got it when I worked on The Tonight Show, and I've gotten it about other shows. Even my sister said, didn't Jackie Gleason make up most of that stuff, just ad-libbing on The Honeymooners?
Yeah, right.
And on The Tonight Show, there was the former head writer, Hank Bradford. His daughter brings home a guy that she's dating at Harvard. So the guy said, what do you do for a living? And he says, oh, I write the monologue, for Johnny Carson. She goes, doesn't he just make that up when he walks through the curtain? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get that. I get this opinion of writing where people just think it's so easy. It may not even exist. When it looks good, you just go, oh, this isn't written. This is.
Exactly. And you were talking about tragedy being part of comedy. And I think somebody once famously said that comedy is tragedy plus time.
Right. And I think that's the concept of the show that I'm doing.
It is.
I basically interview dead people, but I don't pretend they're dead. I pretend that I don't even mention that they're dead.
So tell us about your show then. I was going to get to it in a bit, but let's talk about it now. Over My Dead Body. Tell us what it's about.
What we do is we travel around the world to cemeteries of famous dead people, plug a mic into their headstone. We have a host that sits next to it. And we have a voiceover actor, obviously, and we interview them about their past, what they're working on now, get their take on current events. And I got the idea back from the Tonight Show. We used to have a fantasy wish list of people that we would love to have on the show, but they would never come on in a million years, like Princess Diana or the Queen, or people that were dead. Wouldn't it be great to have Humphrey Bogart come, that kind of thing.
Right.
And with green screen technology, I mean, I've had people go like, don't they arrest you for showing up and filming in these cemeteries? I said, no, we do it in a studio. But I've had people say to me, how can you do that? That's like so eerie, but only I've had maybe 2 people say that. The rest is a great idea.
Well, that means they don't have a sense of humor, because I think that's really funny stuff.
It is very funny. So that, in fact, one of the reviews said this shows that it's really true that humor is, tragedy plus time.
Does it require you to do a lot of research?
A ton, it turns out.
A ton.
I try, everything in my show is accurate. So I didn't realize going in how much research would be involved. And I had a little other surprise, is that my crew I have 14 people. They're all in their early 30s.
Right.
And they said to me, who's Mae West? I swear to God, who's Groucho Marx?
Oh my
I
goodness.
go, are you kidding me? Who's Jimmy Durante? I realized that the people that I chose to do an episode on, interview, I had to end up spending about a third of the episode educating people who they were in the first place and why we're doing it. And as a result, Amazon Prime listed us as not only comedy, but education.
Oh, really? When I was teaching, and still do teach, but when I was teaching full time, I would frequently say names from the past to students who are 18 years old. They were freshmen. And one of the ones they had no idea about was Johnny Carson, which is not even all that long ago.
That, in fact, his nephew, who was one of the producers on the show, Jeff Sotzing, said that initially he wouldn't release, because he's in charge of the Carson library, all the clips.
Right.
He was very careful about what he released. And now it's like, he says, I just want people to remember my uncle. And it's amazing that even though he died in 2005 and he left the show in 1992, you're only talking like 32 years ago.
That's right. Most people have no idea who Fred Allen was, who was the originator of all that. They have no idea who he was. Do you believe in research? Is research like a very great thing for you to do? Did you do it as well when you were working on sitcoms and on movies?
I did. Even when I did an episode for The Love Boat, we had to choose a rare stamp. This is before the internet. I went to UCLA to the library and really did work, finding out which is the rarest stamp that we used on the 200th episode of the show.
Right.
Where, they wanted to have a plot where they could just book a bunch of celebrities. So I had them, searching for this rare stamp that was hidden on the ship.
Mm-hmm.
So they got Andy Warhol and Cloris Leachman and Milton Berle. And I got to write in one episode for everybody I ever watched growing up. Andy Griffith. I think I've had early on, not at the very beginning, but pretty early, a sense of responsibility of how many people television affects. Most of them are probably a lot smarter than me when it comes to whatever I'm writing about. There's some guy in Missouri that's going to say this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, and have some little plot point that has not been researched.
Well, I think anytime that you put into any entertainment piece something from the actual world, from reality, if you say or do something wrong, somebody's going to call you out on it.
Right.
When you're fictionalizing it, it's a lot easier. Give us the sense of the process of what you do with Over My Dead Body. Is it the same as working on any sitcom, or is it different?
It's much different. The first thing I do is I just read an overview on the person's life. And then I'll just go online and I'll say, I want, right now I'm writing an episode on Walter Cronkite,
right.
Another person people probably have. So I'll put in give me 50 funny Walter Cronkite quotes, or give me little known facts. And you'd be surprised what you can find about he used to be a race car driver, how he bought his first boat. His father was a dentist and he was going to be a dentist, but his dad said, don't do that because people have bad breath. He was raised in Texas. what he said about being the most trusted man in America. He says, "I tell the truth on the air so I can get away with lying to my wife." That's what he said. I thought it was a great line. So anyway, I'm in the middle of writing this thing, and I'm going to have him do the actual news as of today, how he would do it.
Do you write them all yourself, or is there a team?
I do. I had like a few other writers. People ask, and I go, okay. They wear me down, so I go, okay, fine. You do an episode, and then I end up having to rewrite the whole thing. Sounds like it came out of Wikipedia, and I find it's harder to rewrite something than it is to just start from scratch.
Interesting.
Because I feel I'm trying to piece it together, then it kind of looks like it's like put together on index cards, that kind of thing.
All right, so explain for the listeners who don't know, since some of this is about past experience, what is the difference between the way you do it and the way a typical, standard, traditional sitcom is written?
Well, this show is different than what I'm doing now, but a typical sitcom, a person comes in and they have their sample scripts read, and somehow they were able to get in the door, whether they got an agent or they knew somebody, just got in the door somehow. And they say, "What do you got for us?" And you sit around the staff and you just want to like die because you're so nervous. And you pitch some ideas. And hopefully they go, "Wow, that would make a great episode." I've been lucky that way. I don't know how. Sometimes I come up with ideas in the car on the way over, or I'm just winging it.
Are those the best ideas?
Sometimes, and then you go off and they'll either say, "Give us like a story outline," and then we'll go from there. Or they'll make an appointment with you to break the story together with the staff. That's usually what happens. And you'll sit down and you'll just scene by scene. Well, you'll probably give them your story and then they'll rip it apart. But that happens on every single episode forever.
Sure.
You're taking notes and then you type it up, you give them the story, you might get a few other notes and they go, "Okay, write the teleplay." So you write that, hope it doesn't, see, you're convinced it sucks by the time you're done it. It doesn't matter. You could be the producer of the show. You think your stuff sucks because there is nothing more terrifying than sitting down at the table read with all the actors and having it read out loud. And sometimes there's a person from the network there. And then you find out how funny it is. It might be funny to, on paper.
Have you ever done a script where it came out worse with the table read? Usually the actors plus everything.
It doesn't come out worse, but sometimes you can see where the slow spots are.
Mm-hmm.
Or you go, we didn't really need to say that. We could, that kind of thing.
And so writing on a staff, you're either working in a room around a table with a bunch of other writers, or you may be sent off to write on your own as you create a script.
Most of the time you're on your own doing the draft. You don't write, and then you'll sit down with the writers and then they'll just go through page by page. Somebody might have a better idea, or, I did this. I learned a lot from Mike Scully, who worked on The Simpsons. Before he did The Simpsons, we worked on Out of This World together. He told me, never skip ahead and go back to something. He goes, just if you're stuck, just get unstuck before you go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of gone with that theory. But when you talk about sitting around the table, the first person I think of is Mike Scully. He was like, sometimes you didn't even think he was listening. He would hear everything that everybody was saying. I don't know how he did this. And it's very much like the old Dick Van Dyke Show, where people sit around and, sometimes you're snowballing ideas for episodes, but usually it's just giving notes to something that's already been delivered.
And because it's more streamlined on Over My Dead Body, it's probably a little of a quicker and less challenging process in terms of the overall concept of a script. Am I right?
It is. Yeah. A lot of considerations with a sitcom when they'll say, especially toward the end of the season, when they run out of money from the license fee, they go, "We don't have enough money to do 4 sets." At the end of every show, every season, at some point, somebody's stuck in an elevator, or somebody broke down in the car and they're calling from, their phone. And you go,
You're trying to convince us that TV is about money and that it's all practical considerations that have to have creative solutions.
Well, Norman was very creative, Norman Lear, but his business partner, Jerry Perenchio, said, "I see an episode like a pancake. Like what? He goes, just keep turning out the pancakes. Like there's 24, he had 8 shows on at one time. So I'm thinking like he's thinking of television like I'm going to an IHOP.
Well, it's a little bit of an assembly line in that case.
Yeah, it was quite, or they called it a shop, a factory. It really does run like clockwork.
So you're talking about Norman Lear, and obviously you had the great privilege of working with him. What would you say are the artistic or life lessons that you learned from him that maybe had a real impact on how you look at writing, your career, life, etc.?
Yeah, one time we were on a plane together, we weren't on a trip together. We just happened to be on the same plane,
right?
Coming back from New York to LA, and it was the American Airlines. It was the red eye. And we were over Joplin, Missouri. He said to the flight attendant, "Where are we now?" And she tells him, "Joplin, Missouri." He says, "See all those lights?" I'm looking, it's all the lights. Some of them are street lights, but mostly probably houses, buildings. He goes, "Every single one of those has a television." And at that time, I don't even know if Fox was in existence yet. There are 3 networks. There's 3 hours of prime time a week. So each network only has 21 hours a week. And he said, what we think of, what we do, he goes, we have made every one of these people laugh at like once. It wasn't about how great we were or anything we did was. He goes, but we'll never meet them. They'll never meet us. We do something, and about 4 weeks later, they're watching it. And he goes, and that's one town. Then we were like Kansas City. Then we were like, I have never gone on a plane since without looking down at the country. And it really gave me a sense of responsibility to try to do the best work I can.
Well, sure. Because if you're sloughing it, then the chances are it's going to not get much attention for any length of time.
Yeah. And it's just the idea that the country is huge. And just that so many people, this particular medium reaches everybody. Now, of course, we have streaming, we have, our cell phones and all. But like the idea that you can talk on your cell phone and, have a video conference with somebody in China, for free, really, you just like log on.
But he clearly was expressing to you at the same time,
right,
to have pride in your work, to do the best you can because you are serving all of these people.
Yeah, and I think that between that and the type of shows that he did, it really had an impact. The same thing with Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson said, "I'm not looking to be the funniest person on television. People look at me before they go to bed." He goes, and also it's hard to be hilarious all the time. He said, "I'm looking to just make people smile and feel good with what they're seeing and entertain them on a consistent basis."
Well, Carson was, for me, for a period of time in my younger days, a kind of a savior because I felt very isolated and alone when I first got to Los Angeles, and I would watch him at night and I no longer felt alone. I felt like I was connected to the world in some way.
Right.
He had that effect on people, didn't he?
He did. I think it had to do with the fact that he was more interested in his guests than he was in himself. He would always let the guests talk, even if they were boring. He might not put them back on the show, but he really showed that he had a respect for the people that he had on. I love David Letterman, but he's not the same. It's just a different thing. That's all.
Different style. And today the styles are extremely different from Carson. I've always wondered, so I'm going to ask you, you'd be the first person I've ever asked this of because you're the first person I know who actually wrote on that show. When he'd have a guest on, did he have a list of potential lines that he could use during the interview, comedy lines, or was he just that fast?
With the guests, he was just that fast.
Just that fast.
We would write savers for him. We called them savers.
Savers.
Where if he bombs on a joke, he could have a comeback for that.
But that's in the monologue.
That's in the monologue or with a sketch, although I really just did the monologue. But for the guests, no, he was really absolutely nothing was written as far as he had the questions he was going to ask. And he just kind of went with it.
And that is something that you cannot train someone to be. Am I right?
You cannot. Absolutely cannot.
It's almost impossible to be that quick and that funny unless it's innate.
I agree with you. And I think that's why not everybody can do it. Letterman can do it. Jay Leno can do it. Pretty much all the hosts can do it. That's why they're the host.
Right. Right. Exactly. Did you enjoy your time working on The Tonight Show?
I did. To this day, I read articles about how cold Carson was. He didn't talk to them, not to the writers. He was real nice to us. In fact, after the show ended, when O.J. Simpson got arrested, I was living about a couple miles from him out in Malibu, and we watched the entire 13-month trial together.
You and Carson?
Yeah, pretty much almost every day.
Wow.
And when he said, yeah, I was thinking about writing a book just about watching, I don't know how interesting.
Oh my goodness. You should write a book about that. That would be fascinating to know.
But he had, like, Robert Klein came over, Steve Martin came over a couple times. But he said one time when Robert Shapiro made some argument, I think it was before Johnny Cochran came into the trial, he did something and that got under Marcia Clark's skin. And he said, "Oh, she's not going to win." And I said, "Well, I just read she did 23 murder cases. She's 23-0." And he looked and he said, "Well, now she's 23-1." He said it was like on the first day. And it just like played out.
Well, that was prescient of his, but he had the ability to look at situations and people and really quickly size them up. Isn't that true?
Yes, especially he had kids on the show, and he had just regular people, a lot of old people from around the country for various reasons. Some guy that, a farmer who was like 102, he was just charming. He was really just very personable.
I occasionally catch clips of him with Rickles. Oh my goodness.
He discovered Rickles. He was the one that put Rickles on TV for the first time.
Just brutal.
Rickles is just
brutal.
We can't do him on our show because I can't find anybody that could do him.
It's completely unique. It's totally unique.
We did Phyllis Diller. We're doing Jimmy Stewart. That wasn't hard, but I have a guy that does a perfect Rodney voice, which is hard to find. Who can do Rodney Dangerfield? Like a lot of people imitate him.
That was also a completely unique act.
Right.
That rat-a-tat, one zap after another, after another, after another. That's really hard to do. So talk to me about, you're working on The Tonight Show, or you're working with Norman Lear, and you're on a staff and you're working on shows. There's going to be a certain amount of pressure involved in turning this material out. How would you handle the pressure as it was coming down the pike? You had a show that night or that week, whatever that was.
There wasn't pressure so much on the sitcom scripts, but for The Tonight Show, Johnny did not want anything done the day before. He wanted everything to be fresh, whereas Jay Leno, for instance, would have most of his jokes written a week in advance. David Letterman didn't even tape on Fridays. He would do 2 shows on Thursday. So what he would do is if something was, late breaking news on Friday, he wouldn't mention it. He didn't have the show tape. Carson always wanted it written that day from that morning's news. So that was pressure.
And that, by the way, is interesting about the difference between not every sitcom, but many sitcoms, and what the talk shows do on a daily basis. And that is that they're topical. The talk show's topical. And so they tend to date quite easily.
Right.
They become passé. Some sitcoms also become passé, but many of them have long, long lives. Like I Love Lucy, even though it is kind of dated, it's still not really passé in terms of the comedy.
Yeah, the references are certainly dated.
Yes.
But the situations are like, they're just, people can relate to them today. Same thing with The Honeymooners. You bring up Lucy, that's my absolute favorite show, and it was the perfect example for how to write a sitcom. If you want to learn how to write a sitcom, just study that, and you'll know how to just go and dig the hole deeper and deeper and deeper until you have to get out of it at the end.
Well, that's classic storytelling, is you put a character into the cauldron of conflict and obstacles, and how do they survive it? That seems to be the major way that most movies and TV shows are written, no matter whether they're comedy or drama. You also wound up working in 1 hour TV. Which TV shows did you enjoy writing on in 1 hour?
The one that no one ever heard of, it was called High Mountain Rangers with Robert Conrad. It got canceled like after, I don't even think they aired all the episodes. I think maybe 3 of them. But I got flown to Fort Lauderdale and I show up on this set and there's this guy from Wild Wild West, I'm looking at, oh my God, this is Robert Conrad, knocked the battery off my shoulder and all that.
Right, right.
And what's he doing? He's drinking a beer. I go, this guy's drinking a beer. And it turns out he drank beer all day. And then he would switch to margaritas at 5 o'clock. So we're going to have a story meeting. I'm with these 2 other writers that he also flew in. And we're all having the same thought. I'm sitting here with Bob Conrad. He's like drinking a margarita. I don't really understand what he's saying he wants from, not because he's drunk. We just didn't get like, yeah, put this kid in it and then we got to shoot it. Oh, we have a boat. Maybe put him on a boat. And the kid turned out to be the actor, was his son. Yeah, like changed his name to Christian Falk, which actually Falk was Conrad's actual last name. So we just got thrown into this, maybe an abyss. And ABC, occasionally the president of ABC at the time, his name was Lou Ehrlich, he would call up, hey, how's it going? I'm just going like, I didn't talk to him, but I just wonder if like the people at the network in California knew like, this is just a party. Yeah, and there is a camera and there's some actors, we're in this house in the middle. I don't even know where it was, somewhere outside of Fort Lauderdale. And I go, is this like television? Is this the normal thing?
That sounds like the inmates were running the asylum.
It was like the Animal House. I felt like I just stepped into Animal House. There was a backdoor pilot, it was called. It was a TV movie. It looked pretty good. And I go, wow, how could these guys have done that?
Because they'd been doing it forever, so they kind of understood it. I mean, Robert Conrad had probably been in thousands of hours of in front of cameras at that point.
Right.
Again, for the listeners, what are the major differences, aside from length, between an hour-long TV show and a half-hour sitcom? How do you see the differences in the way that the stories are told?
The sitcom seems to be, each line is like a ping pong match. Somebody says something, the other person has to have a comeback, or they have to pause. An hour long is just like a short movie, except that you have to have 4 cliffhangers because of the commercials. You don't want them to change the channel.
And usually a lot less comedy.
A lot less comedy, even if it's something like Moonlighting. Let's say, I did not work on that, but it's funny. But there has to be some type of action, something driving it, or else it would be ridiculous. You can talk your way through a comedy, through the 1 hour, or through a movie. You have to actually be able to turn the sound off and understand it from watching it. If you were to turn the sound off on a Lucy show, you might get some of it, but you really have pretty much no idea what's going on.
Well, that harks back to the silent era and what they call pure cinema, where there's no dialogue at all. It's all imagery, and you have to be able to tell the story in imagery. But sitcoms are like little plays. They
really are. And you still have to have your little twists and turns and try to make it like it hasn't been done, a thousand times before. A sitcom is exactly really a play to me.
Do you have a personal preference between writing one or the other?
I have always preferred the sitcoms. I just like them. A great 1 hour show is wonderful. We had a cabinet in our house where I grew up in Pennsylvania, and you open the cabinet and inside is a television, because they used to be in the wooden cabinets.
Right.
So sometimes you'd have a turntable, and I would sit down. It was a big deal if you have a TV and you sit down and there's a schedule, or if it's Dark Shadows, you run home from school to try to catch Angelique, Laura Parker, who played her, who's so gorgeous. She just passed away like 6 months ago. And I would study the credits. I got so good at memorizing. I could recite off the top of my head the primetime schedule of the 3 networks.
You and me both.
And I would study those credits. And then when I got out to California, I met some of the people. Oh, I saw your name on this. Ted Baker was one. He was a stage manager on the Tonight Show. I see your name. And he goes, I did the same thing. He goes, I will bet you that half the people that are out here come from little towns all over America. And what did they do? They studied the credits. They go, well, because people would make fun of me. They would say, oh, you're gonna go and be a television writer. Yeah, yeah, and you're gonna go to California. I said, well, look at all these people. Like they work on the show. I mean, they must exist. Somebody has to.
Did you then have people come to you over time with the same purpose?
I did. And in fact, I have a friend, David Kirkpatrick, who used to be the president of Paramount Pictures and Walt Disney. And he told me the same thing. Some people write me letters, and he goes, well, I got a lot because I ran the studio. And I said, what did you do? He says, I answered every single one of them.
Wow.
When he was 10 years old, or was it 13, he wrote a letter to Walt Disney. He was from Ohio. Walt Disney writes to him back. When he was 18, the Disney Foundation sponsored him to go to Cal Arts. When he was 35, he became the president of Walt Disney Studios.
That's impressive.
And he said it was from writing, and that's how I got my job with Norman Lear. I wrote him a letter. How crazy is that? I want to write Norman Lear a letter. I'm in New York, and I got a call. This is Norman Lear. I got your letter. And then I meet David years later. He goes, yeah, I wrote to Walt Disney when I was 13. I go, well, you win. I was 23 when I wrote to Norman, but
You absolutely need, I'm saying this for the listeners to understand, it is a business of contacts and being in touch with people. And you can't just do it just by being a writer or a director or producer. You have to talk to people. So this is a good example of the way to do it if you have access to people, which is, I think, harder and harder today.
I think it was always hard.
Even with the internet, it's still harder.
Well, just because people get so many letters, when you write a person, here's the secret, I think, to meeting somebody. First of all, don't write 100 letters thinking, well, I'll write to every show. No, write to the ones that you absolutely love, like take 5. And when you write to the person, don't talk about you. Tell them what it is that you like about them and why you've chosen them to write to. And what it is you want to do, and you're hoping that you'll get the opportunity. I realize you get a lot of letters. I get it, but this is here's where I live. This is what I do. This is what I want to do, and this is why I'm writing to you. I'm telling you, it's an amazing thing how you'll get a good response. Sometimes you won't. If you write to the right person,
Yeah.
Usually, you can tell. Like if somebody wrote you a letter and said, Steve, I saw this, and you probably call them up like, thank you. It's
I
like,
get stuff fairly regularly where people contact me for one thing or another. They usually, they maybe want something from me versus not just assistance, but they actually want something from me. But,
right.
I tend to respond in a courteous and a thoughtful and professional way. Most people approach you, they're not mean-spirited. And I think that that's a very good thing. The truth is, I can't really help most people because I no longer am in Hollywood. I'm in Pittsburgh. And so if you're not in that business right there and then, sometimes it's a lot harder unless you've maintained certain contacts.
Yeah, Norman was, at the time he had 8 shows on the air, many things in development, and he could do that. If you write to somebody that has 1 show on the air and they're barely hanging in there, that's
Right.
another story.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, obviously, Norman Lear could be very generous. You're correct. Someone who is maybe on a show that's going out, that's no longer going to be on the air, they can't really do anything for you, really, except maybe introduce you to one person or another.
Right. You mentioned contacts. I think people were spending way too much time trying to make contacts and far little time writing or acting, or maybe taking a class might be a good idea.
Definitely. Definitely, they need to be spending time doing what it is they want to do. I am curious about script doctoring, which I've never done. I've never been a script doctor, though I've been a consultant on many different scripts about whether they work or not, but I've never been a doctor. How did you get into that, and what is it?
Basically, you get a script. They'll say, "This isn't funny. Can you make this funny? Or can you add a love story? I don't feel sorry for this guy." So you come up with some type of a scene where you go, oh my God, I really like this guy. He's got a sensitive part to him. For instance, this isn't mine, but in Rocky, right at the beginning, you had Sylvester Stallone. He's trying to collect money from someone, like he's a loan shark or he's working for a loan shark. And then the guy says, break his fingers or whatever. Stallone says, I'll break your fingers. I'm not breaking his. That guy's got a family. He's trying to feed his family. He didn't get paid. Give the guy a break. Like when I'm breaking nobody's. I think I forget how Rocky goes, but I think he might have even given the guy the money. Like, here, pay. All of a sudden, it's like he's the friendly collector. You go, well, this guy, I like this guy. Look, he's tough, but look at him.
How does one become in a position where someone asks you to revise other people's work?
What happened to me, this is with Catch Me If You Can, there was a producer named Hall Bartlett who had done Jonathan Livingston Seagull and I forget what else. And he bought the rights to the Frank Abagnale's book outright. And he wrote a script. I don't know if he wrote it himself or he had, I forget what it was. It was before Spielberg got involved, like way before. And he said, could you rewrite this, because this guy's like a scumbag, these scams, make him kind of likable. And I did it for free. I don't know why, but I did. And he went and showed it all around town, and he could not get the thing made. And then he died, and his wife got the rights and sold it. Oh. But it made the rounds. So my agent got a call, said, it went to this woman, Megan Rose, who worked at Warner Brothers for 27 years as the story analyst. And she knew Paul Bartlett, and she had read this terrible script. And she said, I can't believe you did this. And she's the one that actually put the word out. And I started getting work. It's actually legal to hire multiple people to do rewrites. They would pay you for like a week or two. It was a weekly salary thing. And they would take bits and pieces from different people. And then it would go to arbitration. You would never get credit because the first and the last writer always get the credit.
Right.
So then you tell people, oh, I worked on all this stuff. And then unless they call the legal department at the Guild, they won't see your name. So they think, no, you didn't work on that. And in the case of Catch Me If You Can, it ended up completely being rewritten by a guy named Jeff Nathanson. And then they really deviated from the story. They inserted a father who had died early on. They made him go throughout a lot of the movie with Christopher Walken. And I thought they did actually a really good job on that.
Well, it's a pretty good movie. They had a fairly decent director working on the movie. Like maybe one of the greatest directors who've ever lived.
Yeah, he did a hell of a job. Everything about that was good.
And a good star.
And a real good star. Well, two of them, Tom Hanks.
Exactly. And Christopher Walken.
Walken and Leonardo DiCaprio. That was great. That is a niche profession, script doctoring.
Script doctoring. So is it fulfilling or is it frustrating? Most of the time you will get paid, so you're taking it for the money, but is it...
No, that... You get paid all the time. I'm just that first time I just did it.
So did you find that frustrating to work on something that's somebody else's work and then maybe you don't get credit on it?
Yeah, I couldn't stay. It's like I feel bad, coming on your show and complaining that somebody hired me to rewrite a script. But it's very frustrating. You don't get credit on it. You don't really have much input. A lot of times you don't even hear if they liked what you did.
So you have to be a complete mercenary about it, right?
Yeah, you basically, Robert Towne was famous for doing it, but he'd say, yeah, I'll do it. Give me $50,000 a day. And this is like 30 years ago.
And David Mamet is a famous script doctor, and they're definitely famous script doctors.
Yeah, Nora Ephron rewrote Sleepless in Seattle, I think in 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, although she ended up getting credit on it. She was also the director.
The director, sure. What would you say are the biggest challenges of being a script doctor?
Getting the work in the first place is a good challenge. Sometimes you'll get a script. How about this one, where they want something changed, and you read it and you go, this is great. I wouldn't change any of it. Like, what do you want me to do? Ruin this?
So what do? Do you walk away?
Sometimes. Well, I'll just say, well, we just want to change, we want to add this, put a cop in it. I'm just making this up.
Right.
Or something that's like totally, I go, and then I'll say, well, that doesn't really, that would throw the whole thing, because they don't see it. It's a domino effect. If you change one thing, it's like you've ruined maybe the rest of your movie.
I call it pulling the thread on a sweater.
Yeah.
If you pull the thread out of the sweater, it just falls apart.
Yeah, the best thing is if somebody says you want to make it funnier, you want to make somebody more sympathetic, inject a love story or something maybe that where people might, keep them on the edge of their seat, like The Fugitive. That was rewritten every day they were shooting it, apparently.
Right.
And they were laughing because at the end of the movie, it was a big hit. It's now taught in screenwriting classes.
Oh, sure.
Everybody was making it up, apparently.
There's a famous story about Mario Puzo, who wrote the book The Godfather and then co-wrote the movie The Godfather with Francis Ford Coppola. And there's a famous story that he had no idea how to write a screenplay. So he and Coppola sit down and they write this screenplay, and obviously Coppola's giving him some guidance on that, but they finish writing the screenplay and he comes out of it and says, I really don't know how to write a screenplay. So he goes and he gets a book about how to write screenplays. And the first thing in the book says, see The Godfather.
Oh, that's really funny.
So
that's all you got to do is see The Godfather.
See The Godfather. So what are a few of the things that you think a screenwriter must do in scripts in general, beyond getting the mechanics of it right, to secure a chance at a sale? What are the things that beginning writers should concentrate on when they're thinking about getting produced?
My real expertise, if I even have that, is sitcoms. David Lloyd, who was probably my favorite sitcom writer of all time, who did Mary Tyler Moore, and he wrote the famous Chuckles Bites the Dust episode. And so David.
Yeah.
Well, he spoke at NYU, and like 6 people were there to go see him. Like they didn't even care. It was unbelievable. So it's like this private audience with David Lloyd. And he said the difference between movies and television is television, you should be able to turn off the picture and just listen to them talk. He goes, but movies, you should be able to turn off the sound and watch it. He goes, one's visual, one is not. So he said, here's what you have to do. He goes, take your absolute 2 favorite shows. And my 2 favorite at the time that were on the air were Taxi and MASH. And he said, at the time, Sony Walkmans were out, little cassettes. He says, make an audio recording of those shows, of an episode, and put it on. Don't watch it. He goes, just put it on and listen to that show like 500 times or maybe 300, hundreds of times, and then come up with a plot. He says, and if you need a script, get a script. This is before you could download things, but you could go to Sam French or find a script. So you know how it's done, and write an episode. And you will have heard this thing so many times, your dialogue is going to be just drop dead perfect. He goes, and I did that for Taxi, and I did that for MASH. Now I had what I called my arsenal of 2 things. And then I wrote my letters. And Norman Lear called me. I sent him the scripts. He had everybody in his company read it, including his driver at the time was Jeff Shapiro, and Mark Pollack, and Glenn Padnick, and Fran McConnell, and all the people, Alan Horn, the whole thing. And they recommended me, and then Norman read them, flew me out, and put me under contract, and I ended up working for him for 2 years. I said, what was so good? One time I said, what was so good about it? They're like, why me? I wasn't the only one. He had hired 3 other people too, because that's what he did. He said, the dialogue. He said, you can teach story construction, but the dialogue is very hard to get for characters because people look at the TV, and when they write an All in the Family on spec, they will write something, and to them it sounds like Archie and Edith because they're picturing it. But to a stranger, a person just goes, the characters kind of they don't really sound the same. But you nailed these characters, and that's exactly how I did it. From what David Lloyd, I did that with Kate and Allie too. I could write Kate and Allie ordering lunch, and it would sound like Kate and Allie. Just like it's just kind of drilled into me.
Because you had spent a lot of time listening to it, just listening and listening. Just
listening over and over, almost. I had to listen to these things 100 times. I mean, I could do that. Anybody could do that. You could do it with a Seinfeld. Just take, and don't take just one show. Do it to show that you can do it on 2. All of a sudden, you have a career because somebody can, and that's how you get in. And then down the line, if you have an idea for a show or the network knows you and they'll come to you, then you go there. You don't just sit at home going, I have an idea for a TV show.
No.
You not only have to know how to write, you have to write, a lot, and you have to be involved in production. You don't just say, I'll find somebody that can do that
Right.
for me.
Right. Right.
So that's my advice to anybody who wants to write for television. And I promise you, it'll work if you do that.
I think that you're right. If you have any talent at all, that hones it in. Tell us a little bit about your TEDx talk, Square One at 60. Give us the brief on that.
The brief on that was that despite the successes we have talked about in this show so far, I had lots of periods of unemployment, and I found myself broke, borderline homeless, and in trouble with the law. That's putting it mildly. And then I, started doing my show for Amazon, and I was asked to do a TED Talk about, all of this. And then the pandemic hit, and then I was hoping, oh God, I hope they'll never call me. Like, I was happy. We're in a pandemic that they can't do it now, because otherwise I got to get up and do this whole thing about my life. And then they called anyway when it was a pandemic. Oh, we got the vaccine now. Oh, thanks, thank God. Now, so I did this thing called Square One at 60, and one of the things that didn't happen to me that I did to myself. I got desperate and I put fake checks in my account, got arrested, and went to jail.
Mm.
When people found out about it, I thought I was going to be kind of banned. And what they did was they all came around. They said, even Norman Lear, he said, you should have told me. He said, I would have helped you. And then he told me a story about his dad. When he was 9, I didn't know this 40 years ago. When Norman was 9 years old, his father sold these fake bonds and went to prison for 4 years. And they had to sell the family furniture, and him and his mom had to move in with the grandmother in another town.
Oh my.
He said he was humiliated. And then people, Hollywood's kind of known for this shoot yourself in the foot because of drugs. But, people get into all, Robert Downey, the famous story, or all that. I was still so embarrassed after I do this TED Talk that I didn't even post it on Facebook, because I was afraid like all my industry friends would read this and like I would be, and finally, about 8 months after it came out in 2021, somebody posted it on my page and said, I just saw this. I can't believe this. Is like, and I got this overwhelmingly great response. And I have to be honest, I felt not just embarrassed, but ashamed that I hadn't just been honest with people. And you don't have to tell everybody like all your stuff, but I mean, I was putting on appearances that completely didn't have to be put on.
Well, it's understandable. That's, not something you want to crow about.
No, but I mean,
But the TEDx talk you should crow about, because it's excellent.
I was very happy. They said to me, I said, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, let's say that somebody told you you're going to die in 18 minutes. And the only thing that anybody's going to remember you by is what you say in the next 18 minutes. What would you say? And that's what I would say. And I did it in 14 minutes. I go, that would be it, if like nothing else.
Was it hard to put together, aside from the emotional part of it?
I was walking around the shopping mall. And I go, like, what am I going to do? What wisdom do I have to impart to anybody? And it was basically, they always say it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And I said, no, that's actually not true. I did this show about Julia Child, and she said the only difference between pudding and a souffle is if one falls or not. She has the same ingredients, but they're cooked like a little bit differently. And if it falls, you can throw in some ice cream, stir it around. And I go, it's not a failure. It's just a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the way I approached life. I just said, my talk was really about life as a mixed bag.
Life is a mixed bag. I am having the most marvelous conversation with Steven Kunes about life and comedy and writing and Hollywood and all these wonderful things. We're going to wind the show down a little bit right now. And I'm wondering, in all of your many experiences over a long time, do you have a story that you could share with us that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or just plain funny?
I do. And it's one that I share periodically with people. I was writing what's called a Saturday morning kickoff special for NBC back in, I think it was like 1986. And it was called Alvin Goes Back to School.
Okay.
And it was kind of a takeoff on Rodney Day, Back to School movie.
Yeah.
This one was where Alvin the Chipmunk shows up and he takes over the school. He lets all the kids go home, but he makes the parents sit in the class. It was a way to promote, the Saturday morning schedule. So we had like Betty White and Doris Roberts and I don't know, whoever was on the network at that time. And we're sitting around a story meeting, and one of the executives at NBC in specials, a woman, she said, I just have one problem with this whole story, this whole concept. And it wasn't even my idea. I just was brought in to write it, but they already knew what they wanted to do. I said, what's that? And she goes, well, Alvin, I mean, these are parents. He can't just make them sit there. They're the grown-ups. They could just get up and walk away. What would prevent them from just doing that? I mean, you're asking the audience to suspend reality. And I said, well, I think we already asked them to suspend reality when we made the principal a chipmunk. And she gave it some thought. And the other people there was a guy who ran specials named Rick Ludwin. I thought he was going to have a heart attack. He was laughing so so you get these kind of notes over the years. You're just like, oh, well, the guy's a chipmunk. You're asking me why the parents can't leave?
We do get these very strange notes from people who may not necessarily be creators themselves, but they have opinions.
I think she realized what she said after and then I realized that's like my fault. I probably shouldn't have said that, but it was okay. But so I still talk to the producers, once in a while, and we never finish a call without saying, don't forget the principal's a chipmunk.
All right, so last question for you today, Steven. You've already given us a huge amount of really great advice, in particular that David Lloyd piece, which I think was fantastic. But I'm wondering if you have any other solid pieces of advice or tip that you can lend to those who are trying to get into the business, or maybe they're in a little bit trying to get to the next level.
The main one is show up. If you want to make it on Broadway, you have to go to Broadway. If you want to make it in television and movies, you have to go to LA. The odds are tough anyway. Why would you want to cut them to zero by not going where the business is? And most of the people that ask me the question you just did, and I give them this answer, they don't follow through on it. And I'll go like, why you wouldn't want to go and maximize your chances. The other thing is, know your TV and movie history. If you want to work in the car business, you should at least get a book about when the car was invented and all the different models that came out. I'm surprised that people don't know when television started, or anybody that, the pioneers of TV. They've never heard of the Dumont Network. I don't mean you have to be a historian. I just think know what came before you. I think that's important. And my third and final piece of advice is write what you really are good at and what you love. Like I had a friend that he found out that my buddy was Rick Berman, who ran Star Trek. He goes, oh my God, I would like to write that. Can you get me? He's never even seen the show. And I go, so you want me to call my friend and see if I can get you in the door for a show you've never seen? I said, write what you know. And write what you love. Don't just try to say, oh, I think I'll write a horror movie because those are selling.
Indeed.
Like, are you a horror? Do you even go to horror? Oh, no, I don't do that. Well, then, because what's the worst thing that can happen? If you write something that you absolutely love and you're very proud of, the worst thing is it doesn't sell, but at least you wrote something you love. Can you imagine writing a piece of garbage that you not only don't sell it, but you've completely subtracted like 6 months from your life?
And you don't like it.
and you don't like it. So don't do that.
Yeah, I think that's really excellent advice, that people who are in the business usually because they love what they're doing, and they are, if not expert at that particular topic or subject, they're at the minimum very keenly interested in it. And so I think that's really outstanding advice. Steven Kunes, this has been a fantastic hour plus on StoryBeat today, and I really can't thank you enough for your time, your energy, and especially your wisdom on all things writing, Hollywood, and TV and film and so on. So I thank you kindly.
Really appreciate being here.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.